Officer Kyle Banning thought he had just made the bust of the month. He saw a black man sitting in a brand-new, charcoal-grey Bentley in an upscale neighborhood and immediately assumed the worst. He ignored the man's calm demeanor. He ignored the man's attempts to speak. With a smug grin, Banning slammed the suspect against the hood and clicked the handcuffs tight, already imagining the praise back at the precinct. But the silence that followed wasn't submission, it was the calm before a storm. Banning didn't know it yet, but he hadn't arrested a car thief. He had just assaulted Supreme Court Justice William Harrington, and the judge was about to teach him a lesson that would cost him everything. The afternoon sun dipped low over the manicured lawns of Oak Creek, a neighborhood where the grass was cut with laser precision and the silence cost millions. It was the kind of place where a stray leaf was a scandal and an unfamiliar car was a crisis. Parked discreetly under the shade of a sprawling elm tree was a 2025 Bentley Continental GT, its engine humming a low, powerful purr before falling silent. Inside sat William Harrington. At 62, William possessed a gravity that filled any room or car he occupied. He was a man who had spent 40 years climbing the jagged cliffs of the American legal system, fighting tooth and nail from a cramped apartment in the Bronx to the mahogany bench of the Supreme Court. Today, however, he wasn't Justice Harrington. He was just William. He was dressed casually for a Saturday, a navy cashmere polo, pressed beige chinos, and loafers that probably cost more than most people's first car. He was early for a dinner party with his old law school friend, Senator Robert Sterling, who lived 3 houses down. William hated being early. It felt desperate. So, he had pulled over to check his emails and finish a call with his clerk regarding a pending writ of certiorari. "I'm telling you, Sarah, the precedent doesn't hold," William said into his phone, his voice a deep, rumbling baritone. "Check the case files from State v. Reynolds again. We can't draft the opinion until I'm sure." He hung up and sighed, rubbing his temples. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror. Grey stubble lined his jaw, a stark contrast to his dark skin. He looked tired, but it was a good tired. He had earned this car. He had earned this peace. A block away, a black and white cruiser prowled around the corner. Officer Kyle Banning was 26, bored and hungry for action. He had been on the force for 3 years and still felt like he wasn't getting the respect he deserved. He was tired of noise complaints and rescuing cats. He wanted a collar. He wanted something that would make the sergeant look up from his desk and nod. Kyle's eyes scanned the street. Nothing. Just empty driveways and... Wait. He hit the brakes. There it was. A Bentley. Dark tint, out-of-state plates, and sitting inside, barely visible through the windshield glare, was a black man. Kyle felt a prickle of adrenaline. He knew the stats for this neighborhood. He knew who lived here and who worked here. The people who lived here were old white men with golf clubs. The people who worked here drove beat-up sedans or took the bus. They didn't sit in brand-new Bentleys idling on the side of the road. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Alpha," Kyle radioed in, his voice dropping an octave to sound tougher. "I've got a suspicious vehicle on Elm and 4th. Possible 1099, stolen vehicle. I'm going to investigate." "Unit 4 Alpha, has the vehicle been reported stolen?" The dispatcher's voice crackled back, bored. "Not yet," Kyle muttered, unbuckling his seatbelt. "But give it a minute." He didn't run the plates. If he ran the plates, he might find out it was a rental or a company car, and the fun would be over. Kyle wanted to catch the guy in the act. He wanted the surprise. William was just reaching for his reading glasses when a sharp rap on the window made him jump. He turned to see a young officer, hand resting ominously near his holster, face twisted into a scowl. William frowned. He hadn't been speeding. He was legally parked. He pressed the button to roll down the window. "Good afternoon, officer," William said, his voice calm, carrying the practiced cadence of a man used to commanding courtrooms. "Can I help you?" Kyle didn't return the greeting. He leaned in, chewing gum loudly. "Turn off the engine. Hands on the wheel. Now." William paused. He had heard stories, of course. He had presided over cases involving excessive force. But there was always a part of him that believed his status, his age, and his demeanor would shield him. "The engine is off," William said slowly, placing his large hands on the leather steering wheel at 10 and 2. "Is there a problem? Was I parked illegally?" "Whose car is this?" Kyle barked, ignoring the question. His eyes darted around the car's interior, looking for something. Drugs? Tools? A weapon? "It is my car," William replied, his patience thinning by a fraction. Kyle let out a short, derisive laugh. "Right. Your car. Nice ride for a guy like you. What do you do? Win the lottery?" William's eyes narrowed. The air in the car suddenly felt very cold. "I'm a federal judge, officer, and I would appreciate a little respect." Kyle froze for a second, then smirked. He'd heard it all before. Every perp had a story. "I'm a judge. I'm the mayor's nephew. I'm an astronaut." "Yeah, and I'm the King of England," Kyle spat. "Get out of the vehicle, slowly." William sat still. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and he knew that any sudden movement could be fatal. He had read the files. He knew how fear and bias mixed in the mind of an untrained officer to create tragedy. "Officer," William said, keeping his voice level, but injecting the steel tone he used when a lawyer was out of line. "I am going to reach into my jacket pocket to retrieve my identification. It will prove ownership of this vehicle and my identity." "I said get out of the car!" Kyle screamed, his hand snapping the retention strap on his holster. "Open the door! Now!" William sighed, a heavy sound of disappointment. He unlocked the door and slowly pushed it open. He swung his legs out, standing up to his full height of 6'3". He towered over the officer. Kyle took a step back, intimidated by the man's size, which only made him angrier. He felt small. He needed to reassert control. "Turn around! Hands on the hood!" Kyle shouted, grabbing William's shoulder and shoving him. William stumbled slightly but caught himself. The indignity of the shove sent a flash of heat up his neck. "Officer, you are making a mistake. A very expensive mistake. I advise you to check my registration before you proceed." "I don't need advice from a thief," Kyle snarled. He kicked William's legs apart, harder than necessary. "Spread 'em." "I am Supreme Court Justice William Harrington," William stated, articulating every syllable. "If you continue this, you will be violating federal statutes regarding the detainment of a judicial officer without cause." Kyle didn't listen. He didn't care about names. He was in the zone. He grabbed William's left wrist and twisted it behind his back, wrenching the shoulder joint painfully. "Ow!" William grunted, wincing. "Officer, I have a rotator cuff injury. There is no need for this force." "Stop resisting!" Kyle yelled for the benefit of the dash cam, even though William was standing perfectly still. He slapped the first cuff on. Click. Then he yanked the other arm back. Click. The cold steel bit into William's wrists. He stood there, pressed against the warm hood of his own Bentley, the smell of hot asphalt and exhaust filling his nose. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was walking her poodle across the street. She stopped, staring with wide, fearful eyes. William met her gaze. He didn't look ashamed. He looked furious. "Check my wallet," William commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It is in my breast pocket." Kyle patted him down roughly, pulling out the sleek leather wallet. He flipped it open, looking for a driver's license to run for warrants. He pulled out the license. William H. Harrington. He saw a second card behind it. It wasn't a credit card. It was a heavy, gold-embossed identification card with the seal of the United States Supreme Court. Kyle stared at it. The sun glinted off the gold foil. Justice. United States Supreme Court. For a second, Kyle's brain stalled. He looked at the card. He looked at the man in cuffs. He looked at the Bentley. No, Kyle thought, panic fluttering in his chest like a trapped bird. It's fake. It's got to be fake. You can buy these online. This guy is a pro. Nice prop, Kyle said, though his voice wavered slightly. He shoved the wallet into his own pocket. We'll see what the station thinks about you impersonating a judge. That's a felony, buddy. William closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Call your supervisor. Now. I don't need my supervisor to book a car thief, Kyle said, grabbing William by the arm to drag him toward the squad car. I am not asking, William said. I am ordering you. Call your watch commander. Tell him you have detained William Harrington. If you do not do this in the next 30 seconds, I will ensure that you not only lose your badge, but you will face a civil rights lawsuit that will bankrupt your grandchildren. Kyle hesitated. The man sounded different. Most perps begged. They cried. They swore. This man spoke like he owned the pavement they were standing on. Fine, Kyle scoffed, trying to maintain his bravado. I'll call the Sarge. He'll love this. Another con artist trying to talk his way out. Kyle shoved William into the back of the cruiser. The hard plastic seat was cramped. William had to bend his neck awkwardly. He watched through the wire mesh as the young officer walked to the front of the car and grabbed the radio microphone. William waited. He counted the seconds. He watched Kyle's body language. At first, Kyle was leaning casually against the door. Then, he stood up straight. Then, he looked at the cruiser's computer screen. Then, he looked back at William. Even through the dirty glass and the wire mesh, William saw the color drain from the officer's face. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was instant. Kyle looked like he had just swallowed a handful of broken glass. The radio chatter was audible from the back seat. Unit 4 Alpha, say again, the sergeant's voice barked, sounding tinny and alarmed. You have Dubcho in the back? He says his name is Harrington, Kyle stammered, his hand shaking. I ran the license. It comes back flagged. Do not detain. Dignitary protection required. You idiot! The sergeant's voice screamed, so loud it distorted the speaker. That's Justice Harrington. He lives in D.C., but he has a residence in Oak Creek. Uncuff him. I'm 2 minutes out. Do not move. Kyle dropped the microphone. It dangled by its cord, swinging back and forth like a pendulum, counting down the seconds of his career. He turned slowly toward the back seat. William stared back. He didn't smile. He didn't look relieved. He looked like a man who was about to deliver a sentence. Kyle walked to the back door, his hands trembling so badly he fumbled with the handle. He opened the door. The heat of the afternoon rushed in, but Kyle felt freezing cold. Sir, Kyle stammered, his throat dry. There might have been a misunderstanding. William didn't move. He kept his hands behind his back, emphasizing the cuffs. There is no misunderstanding, Officer Banning, William said coldly. You have assaulted a federal judge. You have profiled a citizen, and you have violated your oath. I can take the cuffs off, Kyle offered, reaching for his keys. He sounded desperate, like a child trying to fix a broken vase before Mum comes home. William shifted away from him. Do not touch me. Kyle froze. But, the Sarge said, I don't care what your sergeant said, William interrupted. You put these cuffs on. You made sure they were tight. Now you will wait until your superior arrives to see exactly what you have done. I want him to see me like this. I want witnesses." William nodded toward the sidewalk. A small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Gable was filming on her phone. A delivery driver had stopped. 2 landscapers were watching. "You wanted a show, officer," William whispered. "Now you have an audience." Kyle swallowed hard. He looked at the neighbors filming. He looked at the judge in cuffs. He looked at his own reflection in the Bentley's window. He knew, with a sinking dread in his gut, that his life as he knew it was over. The silence on Elm Street was heavy, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the frantic, shallow breathing of Officer Kyle Banning. He stood by the open door of the cruiser, his hands hovering uselessly by his sides. Inside the vehicle, Justice William Harrington sat with a posture so regal he might as well have been wearing his judicial robes rather than a polo shirt and handcuffs. Every second that ticked by felt like an hour to Kyle. He looked at the neighbors. Mrs. Gable was still filming, her phone held high like a torch. A jogger had stopped. A delivery truck driver had pulled over and was live streaming on social media. Kyle wanted to scream at them to leave, to threaten them with obstruction. But he knew, with a sick, sinking clarity, that he had lost all authority. Then, the wail of a siren cut through the air. It wasn't a normal approach. The vehicle was moving fast, tires screeching as it rounded the corner. Sergeant Thomas Miller's SUV hopped the curb slightly as he slammed it into park behind Kyle's cruiser. Miller was a 30-year veteran, a man with a thick neck and a thicker skin, usually unshakable. But as he jumped out of his SUV, his face was a mask of sheer panic. He didn't even look at Kyle. He sprinted toward the back of the patrol car. "Oh my God," Miller muttered, seeing the face behind the wire mesh. He recognized him immediately. Everyone in law enforcement knew the faces of the Supreme Court justices. They were the ultimate bosses of the legal system. Miller yanked the door open wider, almost ripping it off its hinges. "Justice Harrington," Miller breathed, his voice cracking. "Sir, I am Sergeant Miller. I don't know what to say. We need to get you out of there immediately." Miller reached for his belt to grab his handcuff key. "Stop," William said. His voice was quiet, but it hit Miller like a physical blow. Miller froze. "Sir?" "Officer Banning put them on," William said, shifting his gaze to the pale young officer standing 10 feet away. "Officer Banning will take them off." Miller turned his head slowly to look at Kyle. The sergeant's eyes were burning with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Banning, get over here!" Kyle's legs felt like lead. He walked forward, his boots scuffing the pavement. He couldn't meet the sergeant's eyes. He couldn't look at the judge. "Unlock him," Miller hissed. "And you better pray to God you didn't scratch him." Kyle reached for his keys. His hands were shaking so violently that he couldn't get the small metal key into the lock. He tried once, twice, scratching the metal against the cuffs. "Steady your hand, officer," William said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You were steady enough when you twisted my arm behind my back." Kyle swallowed a lump of bile. He forced a deep breath, steadied his hand, and turned the key. Click. The cuffs sprang open. William slowly rotated his wrists, grimacing as the blood flow returned. Deep red indentations circled his dark skin. He stepped out of the cruiser, rising to his full height, rubbing his left shoulder. "Do you need a medic, sir?" Miller asked, hovering anxiously. "I can have an ambulance here in 2 minutes." "I don't need a medic, Sergeant," William said, brushing invisible dust off his chinos. "I need a reason. I want to know why I was stopped." Miller looked at Kyle. "Well? Banning?" "Speak up." Kyle's mouth opened and closed. I saw the vehicle idling. It looked suspicious. High-end car, quiet street. I thought it might be a 1099. Stolen. Did you run the plates? William asked. No, Kyle admitted, his voice a whisper. Did I violate a traffic law? No. Did I match the description of a suspect currently being sought in this area? Kyle looked at the ground. No. So, William continued, stepping closer, invading Kyle's personal space. You saw a black man in a Bentley, and you decided that was a crime. Is that the official stance of this department, Sergeant Miller? That my existence in this tax bracket constitutes probable cause? Absolutely not, sir, Miller said quickly, sweat beading on his forehead. This is a gross failure of protocol, a complete failure of judgment. It is more than judgment, William said, his eyes hard. It is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Unreasonable search and seizure, and when he laid hands on me after I identified myself, it became assault. William turned to the crowd of neighbors who had gathered closer. He looked directly at Mrs. Gable's phone camera. Make sure you get his badge number, William said clearly to the camera. Officer Kyle Banning, badge number 4922. Remember it. Kyle felt the blood drain from his face. He wasn't just in trouble with his boss. He was about to be internet famous in the worst possible way. The situation on Elm Street had transformed from a traffic stop into a command center. Within 15 minutes, 3 more squad cars had arrived, their lights flashing, creating a chaotic disco effect against the peaceful suburban twilight. But these officers weren't there to back up Kyle. They were there to contain the damage. A black sedan pulled up, bypassing the police line. Captain David Reed stepped out. He was the precinct commander, a man who spent more time dealing with city council budgets and PR nightmares than street crime. He looked like he was walking to his own execution. Reed adjusted his tie and walked straight to where Justice Harrington was standing by his Bentley. Sergeant Miller was standing guard, ensuring no one else approached the judge, effectively treating the victim like the dignitary he was. Kyle Banning had been ordered to stand by the trunk of his own cruiser, isolated, stripped of his bravado. He watched his captain approach the judge. He saw the handshake, not the firm shake of equals, but the apologetic, two-handed shake of a man begging for mercy. Justice Harrington, Captain Reed said, his voice solemn. I am Captain Reed. On behalf of the entire department, I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apologies. I have been on the phone with the mayor and the chief of police. They are both on their way. You can tell them to save the gas, William said dismissively. I'm not interested in political groveling, Captain. I'm interested in procedure. I want to know how an officer like that, he pointed a long finger at Kyle, ends up patrolling a neighborhood with a loaded weapon and zero understanding of the Constitution. He will be dealt with, sir, Reed promised. Internal Affairs has already opened a file. Internal Affairs takes months, William countered. They bury evidence. They protect their own. I know the game, Captain. I've read the briefs. I've signed the warrants. I've seen qualified immunity protect incompetence time and time again. William took a step closer to the captain. But not today. Today you have a problem. You see, I'm not just a victim. I'm a witness, and I'm a lawyer who knows the law better than anyone in your entire state. William reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I recorded the audio of the entire encounter, from the moment he tapped on my window. Kyle, standing 20 feet away, felt his knees buckle. He hadn't seen the phone. I have him on record, William said, his voice loud enough for Kyle to hear. I have him refusing to look at my ID. I have him using derogatory tone. I have him ignoring my medical condition, and I have him laughing when I told him who I was. Captain Reed's face went grey. Audio evidence destroyed any, he said, she said, defense. Banning might have tried to concoct. "Officer Banning!" Captain Reed barked. The sound cracked like a whip. Kyle flinched. "Yes, sir." "Front and center. Now." Kyle walked over, his legs feeling like jelly. He stopped in front of the captain and the judge. He tried to stand at attention, but he was shaking too much. "Give me your badge," Reed said quietly. The air left Kyle's lungs. "Captain, Badge. Now." Kyle reached up with a trembling hand. He unpinned the silver shield from his chest. The metal felt heavy, warm from his body heat. He handed it to Reed. "And your sidearm," Reed added. This was the ultimate humiliation, to be disarmed in public. Kyle slowly unbuckled his holster belt. He handed the weapon over. He felt naked, vulnerable. "Officer Banning, you are hereby relieved of duty pending an immediate administrative inquiry," Reed announced formally. "You are not to identify yourself as a police officer. You possess no police powers effective immediately." Reed turned to Sergeant Miller. "Sergeant, place him in the back of your unit. Drive him to the station for processing. He doesn't drive a squad car. He's a civilian now." "Captain, please," Kyle pleaded, tears pricking his eyes. "I just made a mistake. I was trying to protect the neighborhood. You know me. I'm a good cop." "A good cop," William interrupted, his voice low and dangerous. "Protects citizens. He doesn't hunt them." William leaned in, his face inches from Kyle's. "You assumed I was a criminal because of my skin and my car. You wanted to feel powerful. You wanted to put me in my place." William pointed to the back of the sergeant's SUV, the cage. "Now, you are going to learn what it feels like to be powerless. Get in the car, Mr. Banning." Kyle looked around. His fellow officers wouldn't meet his eyes. The neighbors were still filming. The live stream comments were scrolling by the thousands. He was alone. Head hung low, Kyle Banning turned and walked toward the back of the sergeant's vehicle. Sergeant Miller opened the door, the same door Kyle had shoved William through less than an hour ago. Kyle slid onto the hard plastic seat. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. He stared out through the wire mesh, watching as the Supreme Court Justice shook hands with the captain, free and powerful, while Kyle sat in the cage he had built for himself. But the nightmare was only beginning. As the SUV pulled away, Kyle's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his girlfriend. "Kyle, why is your face on CNN?" 3 days later, Kyle Banning sat in a hearing room that smelled of stale coffee and dread. It wasn't a criminal court, not yet, but a high-level disciplinary tribunal at the department headquarters. The room was cold, lit by harsh fluorescent strips that hummed with an irritating buzz. Kyle wore his best suit, a charcoal grey one he'd bought for a cousin's wedding. It felt tight across the shoulders. Beside him sat Frank Russo, the union representative. Russo was a bulldog of a man, known for getting cops out of tight spots, usually by burying paperwork or delaying hearings until the public forgot. But the public hadn't forgotten this. Across the long oak table sat 3 high-ranking internal affairs officers, and at the far end of the table, sitting not as a judge but as the complainant, was Justice William Harrington. He wore a bespoke navy suit that cost more than Kyle made in 3 months. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked surgically precise. "Officer Banning," the lead IA investigator, Commander Holloway, began. "We have reviewed the dashcam footage. We have reviewed the bystander video. And we have reviewed the audio recording provided by Justice Harrington. The evidence is comprehensive." Russo leaned forward. "Look, Commander, my client admits mistakes were made. It was a high-stress situation. He saw a vehicle that looked out of place. He acted in good faith to protect the community. We are willing to accept a suspension and mandatory retraining." Harrington let out a low, dry chuckle. It sounded like gavel striking wood. "Good faith," Harrington repeated, tasting the words like spoiled milk. He turned his gaze to Kyle. "Mr. Russo, your client didn't act in good faith. He acted on bias. And frankly, his good faith argument dies the moment he threatened me with physical violence for moving too slowly." "He didn't know who you were," Russo argued weakly. "That is exactly the point," Harrington snapped, his voice booming in the small room. "If I were a plumber, or a teacher, or a mechanic, I would be sitting in a jail cell right now, charged with resisting arrest. The only reason I am here is because I have the power to be here. Justice shouldn't depend on whether the victim sits on the Supreme Court." Harrington opened a leather folder in front of him. He pulled out a document. "Furthermore," Harrington continued, sliding the paper across the table toward Kyle, "you are under the impression that this ends with you losing your job. That is a fantasy." Kyle looked down at the document. It was a civil lawsuit, Harrington vs. Banning. "I am suing you," Harrington said calmly. "Not the department. The department has insurance. I am suing you, Kyle Banning, in your individual capacity. I am suing you for violation of my civil rights under Section 1983. I am suing for assault, battery, false imprisonment, and emotional distress." Russo scoffed. "Qualified immunity protects officers from personal liability, Justice. You know that better than anyone." Harrington smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Qualified immunity protects officers who violate rights that are not clearly established. But the right to be free from unreasonable seizure without probable cause, the right not to be assaulted when compliant, those are clearly established, Mr. Russo. I wrote the majority opinion on Henderson versus City of Chicago last year that clarified this exact standard." The blood drained from Kyle's face. "I'm going to strip you of everything," Harrington said, his voice dropping to a conversational volume, which made it terrifying. "I will take your savings. I will take your truck. I will garnish your future wages. By the time I am done, you won't be able to afford a bus ticket out of this town, let alone a lawyer." Kyle looked at Russo, pleading silently for help, but Russo was staring at the table, defeated. He knew Harrington was right. He wasn't just up against a victim, he was up against the architect of the law itself. "This hearing is a formality," Harrington concluded, standing up. "I expect his badge on my desk by morning. If not, I will hold a press conference on the steps of the Supreme Court and ask why this city employs criminals." Harrington walked out of the room without looking back. Kyle sat in the silence, listening to the hum of the lights, realizing that the handcuffs he had put on the judge were now, metaphorically, on his own wrists, and they were never coming off. If the legal hearing was a slow burn, the internet was an explosion. By Friday night, the video of Kyle shoving Justice Harrington was the #1 trending topic globally. It had bypassed news and become a cultural moment. The hashtag Bentley Justice was everywhere. Kyle sat in his small apartment, the lights off, the glow of the television flickering on his face. He held a beer that had gone warm an hour ago. On the screen, a late-night talk show host was doing a monologue. "So did you see this? A cop in Oak Creek tried to arrest a Supreme Court justice for sitting in a car. Yeah. The cop asked the judge, 'What do you do to afford this?' And the judge basically said, 'I decide if your laws are even real, buddy.'" The audience roared with laughter. Kyle didn't laugh. His phone buzzed. It had been buzzing non-stop for days. Death threats, prank calls, journalists asking for a comment. He had to change his number, but somehow they found the new one within hours. The lock on his front door clicked. Kyle looked up, a flicker of hope in his chest. Amber. Amber walked in, carrying a large suitcase. She didn't look at him. She went straight to the bedroom and started throwing clothes into the bag. "Amber," Kyle croaked. He hadn't spoken in hours. His voice sounded rusty. "Babe, what are you doing?" "Don't call me that," she snapped, not breaking her stride. She grabbed her hairdryer, her makeup bag, her favorite hoodie. Kyle stood up, his legs shaky. "Where are you going? I need you right now. It's bad out there." Amber spun around, her eyes red from crying. "You think it's bad for you?" "Kyle, my boss fired me today." Kyle blinked. "What?" "Why?" "Because I'm dating you," she screamed. "The internet found my Instagram. They flooded my bakery's page with 1-star reviews. They're calling me a racist sympathizer. My boss said I'm bad for business. I lost my job because of your ego." "I didn't mean to." "It doesn't matter what you meant," she yelled, zipping the suitcase shut with a violent rip. "I watched the video, Kyle. I saw how you treated him. You looked like a bully. I don't even recognize you." She walked to the door. Kyle tried to step in her way, but she held up a hand. "Move, or I call the police," she said. The irony hit him like a physical slap. She was going to call the police on him. She walked out. The door slammed shut, echoing in the empty hallway. Kyle sank onto the sofa. He was alone. Then, a piece of paper slid under his door. He stared at it for a long time before standing up to retrieve it. It was an eviction notice. Notice to vacate. Reason: violation of lease clause. For 2. Conduct causing nuisance or bringing disrepute to the property. His landlord didn't want the news vans parked outside anymore. He had 48 hours to get out. Kyle walked to the window and peered through the blinds. Down on the street, a news van was still parked there. A reporter was doing a stand-up segment, pointing up at his window. Kyle pulled the blinds shut. He paced the small living room. He had no job. He had no girlfriend. He was about to have no home. And with Harrington's lawsuit looming, he had 0 net worth. He walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. He looked at himself in the mirror. He looked older. The arrogance that had been there just a few days ago, the smirk he had worn when he tapped on the Bentley's window, was gone. In its place was fear. He remembered what he had said to Harrington. "I don't need advice from a thief." Now, society looked at Kyle and saw something worse than a thief. They saw a tyrant who had been toppled. He went back to the living room and sat on the floor, his back against the wall. He picked up his phone and opened the banking app. Balance: 120. Credit card debt: 4,500. He was ruined. Just then, his email chimed. It was a notification from a GoFundMe page his brother had tried to set up for his legal defense. Campaign removed. Reason: violation of terms of service. We do not allow campaigns for the defense of alleged violent crimes or hate speech. Kyle threw the phone across the room. It cracked against the wall. He curled his knees to his chest. He realized, with a terrifying clarity, that Justice Harrington hadn't just defeated him in a legal battle. He had erased him. Kyle Banning was no longer a person. He was a cautionary tale. And the karma was far from over. The gavel came down like a guillotine. That was the sound Kyle Banning heard in his nightmares for years. It wasn't the sound of the handcuffs clicking onto Justice Harrington's wrists. It was the sound of the civil judgment that effectively ended his life as a free man. The verdict had been delivered 11 months after the incident. The jury, composed of ordinary citizens who had seen the viral video millions of times, deliberated for less than 3 hours. They awarded William Harrington $2 million in damages. But the money wasn't the point. Harrington had donated the entire sum to a legal defense fund for indigent youth before the check even cleared. The point was the message. Kyle Banning was broken. 5 years had passed since that day on Elm Street. Washington, D.C. in mid-January was a brutal place for the poor. The wind whipped off the Potomac River, tunneling down the wide avenues like an invisible knife, cutting through layers of cheap clothing to find the bone. Kyle stood on the curb outside the Grand Meridian Hotel, shivering. He was 31 years old, but if you looked at him under the harsh, yellow glow of the street lamps, you would guess he was pushing 45. His hair, once thick and styled with gel, was thinning rapidly at the temples. His face was gaunt, the skin grey and papery, etched with deep lines of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could erase. He adjusted his red polyester vest, trying to pull it tighter around his chest. It was the uniform of Prestige Valet Services, a company that hired anyone with a driver's license and a pulse, no questions asked. The vest was 2 sizes too small, and the name tag pinned to it simply read, K. Banning. "Hey, Banning, wake up!" The voice cracked like a whip. Kyle flinched, his shoulders hunching instinctively. It was his shift manager, a 22-year-old college kid named Travis. Travis had never worked a beat, never held a gun, and never seen a dead body. But he had power over Kyle, and he loved to use it. "I'm awake, Travis," Kyle muttered, his gaze fixed on the asphalt. "Doesn't look like it," Travis sneered, checking his watch. "We have the annual Judiciary Gala tonight. Big money, big tips. Don't embarrass me. If you scratch a bumper, you're done. I don't care if the roads are icy." "I know the drill," Kyle said, his voice hollow. "Do you?" Travis stepped closer, smelling of peppermint vape smoke. "Because I Googled you, Banning. I saw the video. You used to be a big shot, huh? Pushing people around? Well, tonight, you push the pedals. That's it. Know your place." Kyle swallowed the bile rising in his throat. "I know my place." Travis laughed and walked away to yell at another valet. Kyle stood alone in the cold, staring at his frozen breath. Know your place. That was the lesson the universe had been teaching him every single day for 5 years. The years had been a slow, agonizing slide into irrelevance. First, he lost the badge. Then, the bankruptcy took the truck and the apartment. He had moved into a basement studio in a bad part of town, the kind of neighborhood he used to patrol with a sneer. Now, he was the one locking 3 deadbolts at night, listening to sirens wail outside, flinching every time a squad car drove by. He had tried to find other work. He applied to security firms, private investigation agencies, even bouncer gigs at dive bars. But the background check always came back flagged. Civil rights violation, excessive force, high liability. No insurance company would cover him. He was radioactive. So here he was, valet parking. The irony was so thick he could taste it. He spent his nights parking cars he could never afford, serving the very class of people he had once tried to dominate. The first wave of cars began to arrive. It was a parade of wealth. Mercedes S-Class sedans, Range Rovers, BMW 7 Series. The air filled with the smell of expensive exhaust and even more expensive perfume. Kyle opened doors with a gloved hand, forcing a smile that felt like a mask. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Grand Meridian. Keep it close, boy. It's cold." "Yes, sir." "Here." A set of keys thrown carelessly at his chest. Kyle caught them, fumbling slightly. He ran back and forth to the parking garage, his legs burning. The cold was seeping into his joints, awakening old injuries. He parked a Porsche, then a Lexus, then a vintage Jaguar. He was invisible to the guests. He was just a mechanism, a pair of hands to take the keys and make the problem go away. Around 8 p.m., the rush slowed down. The VIPs were arriving now, the ones who came fashionably late. A silence seemed to descend over the hotel entrance. The other valets straightened up. Travis ran a hand through his hair, looking nervous. Rolling silently up the driveway was a vehicle that commanded attention. It wasn't flashy like the Ferraris. It was regal. A 2030 Bentley Continental GT, painted a deep, metallic charcoal grey that looked almost black in the night. Kyle felt his stomach drop. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was the same car, not the exact same physical machine. The model was newer, the lines sharper, but the soul of the car was identical. It was the ghost of his mistake, rolling on 4 rubber tires. Kyle froze. He couldn't move. His boots felt welded to the icy concrete. "Banning, get the door!" Travis hissed from the podium. Kyle couldn't breathe. He stared at the tinted windows. He knew who was inside. He prayed to a god he hadn't spoken to in years that it was anyone else, a CEO, a diplomat, anyone but him. "Banning!" Travis shouted, louder this time. Kyle forced his legs to move. It felt like walking to the gallows. He approached the driver's side door. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle. He saw his own reflection in the polished glass, a tired, broken man in a cheap red vest, a shadow of the officer who had once tapped on a window just like this with arrogance in his heart. He pulled the door open. The interior smelled of aged mahogany and leather, and then the driver stepped out. Time stopped. William Harrington had aged, but he had not diminished. If anything, he had grown more formidable. His hair was now a shock of pure white wool. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a lion that no longer needs to hunt to prove it is the king. He wore a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, a long black cashmere overcoat draped over his shoulders. He didn't look at the valet immediately. He turned to the passenger side to help his wife, a stunning woman in an emerald gown, out of the car. "Watch your step, my dear," Harrington rumbled. His voice was the same, deep, resonant, the voice of judgment. Kyle stood by the open door, his head bowed low. He wanted to disappear. He wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. If he kept his head down, maybe the judge wouldn't recognize him. Maybe he was just another faceless servant in the night. Harrington closed the passenger door and turned back to the valet. "Good evening," Harrington said, reaching into his pocket for the key fob. "Good evening, sir," Kyle whispered, refusing to look up. He held out his gloved hand. Harrington placed the heavy key fob into Kyle's palm, but he didn't pull his hand away. He paused, the silence stretched out, agonizing and thin. "Look at me, son," Harrington said softly. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Kyle slowly lifted his head. His eyes, watery from the cold and shame, met the steel gaze of the Chief Justice of the United States. Harrington studied him. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He looked at Kyle with a profound, crushing sadness. He looked at the receding hairline, the lines of stress, the cheap vest, the trembling hands. He saw the ruin of a man. "Officer Banning," Harrington said. The use of the title was a knife twist. It highlighted exactly what Kyle had lost. I'm not an officer anymore, sir," Kyle choked out. His voice cracked. "Not for a long time." "I know," Harrington said. "I read the file." Kyle looked down at his boots. "I'm just the valet, sir." Harrington stood there for a moment, the wind whipping his coat around his legs. The guests behind him were waiting, whispering, wondering why the Chief Justice was talking to the parking attendant. "Do you remember what you asked me?" Harrington asked quietly. "That day on Elm Street?" Kyle closed his eyes. He remembered every word. I asked how you could afford a car like this. And do you know the answer now?" Kyle nodded slowly. Tears spilled over his lashes, freezing on his cheeks. "Yes, sir. You earned it." "And I didn't." Harrington sighed. It was a sound of closure. Justice is a heavy thing, Mr. Banning. It weighs on the accused, but it weighs on the judge, too. I took no pleasure in your destruction, but it was necessary. Do you understand why? Because I was a bully, Kyle whispered. Because I thought the badge made me better than you. Because you forgot that dignity belongs to everyone, Harrington corrected. From the man on the bench to the man parking the cars. You forgot that. And now, I suspect, you will never forget it again. No, sir. Never. Harrington reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He pulled out his wallet. The same leather wallet Kyle had once rifled through with disdain. He opened it and extracted a bill. It was $100. He folded it neatly and tucked it into the breast pocket of Kyle's red vest, right behind the name tag. Take care of the car, Mr. Banning, Harrington said. The alignment is delicate. Treat it with respect. Treat it better than you treated me. I will, sir, Kyle said, his voice barely audible. Thank you. Harrington nodded once, a final dismissal, and turned away. He offered his arm to his wife, and together they walked up the red carpet into the warmth of the hotel, surrounded by light and laughter. Kyle stood alone in the dark. He looked at the key in his hand. The weight of it was immense. "Banning, move it!" Travis yelled from the stand. "We got cars backing up." Kyle wiped his face with his sleeve. He climbed into the driver's seat of the Bentley. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud, sealing out the wind and the noise. The silence inside was absolute. Kyle gripped the leather steering wheel, the same wheel he had once ordered Harrington to release. He pressed the start button. The engine purred to life, a low growl of pure power. The dashboard lit up, digital displays glowing with sophisticated elegance. The seat warmer engaged automatically, sending a wave of comfort through Kyle's frozen back. For a brief, fleeting moment, Kyle closed his eyes and imagined a different life. A life where he hadn't been arrogant. A life where he had just smiled, waved, and driven past the Bentley on Elm Street 5 years ago. He imagined he was the owner of this car, driving home to a warm house and a loving wife, respected and secure. He inhaled the scent of the leather, holding the fantasy for just 1 second longer. Then he opened his eyes. He saw his reflection in the rearview mirror. The red vest, the tired eyes, the valet tag. He shifted the car into drive. He wasn't the owner. He was the help. He was the cautionary tale. He drove the Bentley slowly toward the dark, concrete throat of the underground parking garage. As he descended into the shadows, leaving the light of the gala behind him, Kyle Banning finally understood the full weight of the sentence he had been serving. He was driving $1 million car, but he had never been poorer. The darkness swallowed the taillights, and the garage door rattled shut behind him. And that is the story of how one moment of arrogance cost Officer Kyle Banning his entire life. He judged a book by its cover, and the book threw the book at him. It's a brutal reminder that respect shouldn't be reserved for the powerful. It should be given to everyone, because you never know who you're actually talking to. Kyle spent years building an ego, and Justice Harrington tore it down in a single afternoon. What do you think? Was the punishment too harsh, or did Kyle get exactly what he deserved? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a debate going. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please destroy that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.